All right, welcome back. It is time now for the final edition of the DPC Power Rankings for the second tour of this DPC season, which has now come to a complete end. Apologies, this is going up a little bit later than usual. I usually do these on Fridays, but since I wanted to wait until all of the tiebreakers were finished, I had postponed this a little bit longer. But nonetheless, the entire tour has now come to an end with all of its delays that we had in some numerous regions, including Eastern Europe having not played a single match throughout this entire tour. We have reached a conclusion, and that means we're just a few weeks away now from the first major of the year, the one that is supposed to be having an in-person crowd, which is super, super exciting. However, it is still a little bit nerve-wracking that we haven't heard anything from Valve to this point. If the past tells us anything, it's that silence is not a good sign, but I'm still hopeful. With everything that's gone on with Valve and all the controversy, I really hope that they have their heads on straight and they're able to handle this in a very fair manner. They've had a lot of time to think about what can happen when it comes to no Eastern European teams attending this major. So I hope whatever they come up with, if they come up with anything, that it ends up being something that is fair to everyone in the DPC and isn't just an absolute bombshell that just gets dropped and we're expected to just make do with whatever happens. Especially with the fact that we're hearing a lot of rumors that maybe even the Chinese teams will not be participating in this upcoming major. They, of course, had a couple weeks off at the end of March and beginning of April because of the massive COVID outbreak in the midst of China. So with that going down, a lot of Chinese teams have been really afraid to leave the country and go to play at a major, and they're potentially just going to be withholding their placements until the third major of the year, which is probably a reason as to why Vici Gaming was willing to forfeit that series against RNG, which if they had won, they would have attended the major, but given that they forfeited it, they wouldn't be. That's the only real reason I can think of. Obviously, there were some things involved with Irving's physical health problems, but I don't think that that would have been enough for Vici Gaming to full-blown forfeit that series. But regardless, getting into this list now, I'm going to be going through it a little bit quicker. A lot of matches to cover, but I don't want to dwell too much on it. A lot of these teams we will not be seeing on the power rankings for the following tour because they will be getting relegated, including the first 5 teams on this board. The first 2 have not moved in quite a few weeks now. Number 40, we have Simply 2-Based, and number 39, we have Dog Jump. Simply 2-Based, they didn't even play their last series. It was up against Wildcard. They just forfeited it. They were guaranteed relegation, and so I can kind of see why they let it go. We'll see what happens to the roster if they stay together for the following tour, but not very good. And for Dog Champ, they just lose a rough series 2-0 to Evil Geniuses, who has been in an absolute tear as of late. As for number 38, also getting relegated, dropping 1 spot from last week, we have LBZS, who loses both of their series this week, one of which to Magma, which was the other team that I had at the bottom of the list here who was struggling quite a bit. They take that series. They also lose 1 to eHome, and yeah, not a great tour overall for LBZS. Following that, at number 37, dropping 3 spots. It has been a very, very disappointing season for these guys, and I've talked about it in numerous power rankings leading up to this, and I'll talk about it now. It's Balrogs. These guys have had so much potential. They have looked very, very good in a lot of their series. They just can't win any games. They can't win any series, and it's really painful to watch. They're going back down to the lower division, which really sucks. But hey, if they stick together, these guys have a lot of potential. Again, there was not really that many series in this where it felt like they were getting destroyed. A lot of the series felt quite close, including some against some of the better teams in this division. It just never really fully realized itself. So fingers crossed that they stay together. I think there is a lot of potential, but yeah, it just did not work out very well in this tour. At number 36, moving up 2 spots, a team I just talked about, Magma. Doesn't take a whole lot to move up the board. They do still lose a series this week, but it's overall the win over LBZS that puts them ahead of the other 2 teams there. So they're at number 36. And at number 35, this is the lowest placed team on the board that is not getting relegated, and that's the Cut. And honestly, the Cut didn't really impress me too much this tour. I was expecting a lot more from them. Obviously, it is still quite difficult coming in from the lower division to North America's upper division. There is a very, very strong upper portion of the North American division, and the Cut just really didn't feel like it made too much of a dent. Their only 2 wins were coming against the weakest teams in the division, Dog Champ and Simply 2-Based. They looked good there. But other than that, there wasn't a whole lot to look forward to. And so we'll see how they do in the next tour, if they're able to handle the new teams coming in from the lower division, or if they'll end up being relegated as well. It's going to be interesting to see how that goes. Following that, at number 34, dropping 5 spots from last week, it's the Kings from South America. Man, what a disappointing tour for these guys after having a pretty miraculous first tour, making it into the top four, not doing oh so well in those regional finals, but I don't think it was expected of them, and it has been a real fall from grace for them as they go 1-6 throughout this entire tour. It has been pretty rough. None of their series looking all that close either. It really feels like things have fallen apart, so we'll see if they stick together, but they will be going down to the lower division as well as Ball Rocks in South America. Following that, at number 33, narrowly almost making it to the next row, but not quite. They end off on a win. Miraculously, they are always able to beat Team Secret. That's Enigma Galaxy in Western Europe. They're still bottom row. I bumped them up because, again, it's easier to move up when you're in the bottom row, and a bunch of other teams here are struggling. This is more just really a testament to Secret not being able to beat Nigma reliably at all. The Kuro still has Puppy's number even when he's going like 0-6 in the DPC, which is kind of funny, but also a little bit terrifying for Secret because we are getting closer and closer to the end of this entire season. And Team Secret still is going through the early stages of not really gelling together as a full roster. It has been quite a long time now that this roster came together, and it still feels like this is a brand new stack of players that hasn't gotten used to playing with each other. Their drafts are really messy. Their play has been really inconsistent. And I know I'm talking about Team Secret now when I just talked about Team Nigma, but everything regarding Team Nigma and everything that's going wrong with them, I've already touched on in previous power rankings videos. They had Roman standing in for them in this series. I thought he looked pretty good. Good enough for Nigma to steal this series. But yeah, really this is just Team Secret's dumpster fire. Nigma is still going to be going down to the lower division, though. Following that, at number 32, dropping 2 spots from last week, we have OB Neon, another team getting relegated in the upcoming tour. They lose 2-1 to Enigma Galaxy, which I thought was a pretty decent series. Enigma Galaxy, although they are not one of the stronger teams in Southeast Asia, they are definitely not one of the weaker ones, so OB Neon putting up a fight there was really nice to see, especially with how much OB Neon has been struggling in this tour. And then it's a rough 2-0 loss to Polaris, which, you know, no real shame in that. Polaris is a very, very strong team. And for OB Neon, they do drop a little bit. But at the end of the day, it's nothing too drastic. They are still going to be getting relegated, though. Following that, number 31, team I just talked about, Enigma Galaxy, Southeast Asia. They managed to get themselves out of the lower row there with a nice couple of wins. Matter of fact, it was just one win, a 2-1 win over OB Neon, which I just talked about. Not the most impressive win. They did pick a Meepo in Game 2, and if you know me, that's a win in my book. So I was very, very happy to see that. And that has nothing to do with my placement of them. Even if it did, being a number 31 is not necessarily where you want to be on a list like this. But regardless, that is where they finished. They do narrowly escape relegation, so good for them. Hopefully they can improve upon some of the things that they have hopefully learned in this tour. This is a really, really difficult upper division in Southeast Asia, and they've managed to keep their head above water so far, but with teams like Execration and OB Neon who are going to be getting pushed down the lower division and some new, stronger teams coming up, will they be able to handle it? We'll see. Following that, number 30, we have going up 2 spots from last week, Infinity. Infinity ends off on a strong note with a 2-1 win over Balrogs. Again, taking advantage of the fact that Balrogs has been struggling hardcore when it comes to winning matches. They do drop a game to them, but overall, I thought their game was pretty consistent there, and it was just a nice way for them to end the tour. They do manage to dodge relegation as well. Following that, at number 29, moving up 2 spots. Matter of fact, they haven't even played this past week. They ended their tour before my last power rankings. They just move up because a few teams ended up dropping down, notably like OB Neon and APU King of Kings and etc. Yeah, that's Execration. Again, they haven't played any matches. They're going to get relegated, but still, they ended off on a strong note. Following that, at number 28, and I believe this is the last team on the list. Yep, last team on the list that is in fact getting relegated, and it was very close. It was between them and one other team in their tiebreakers. They just couldn't quite come ahead, and that is Brame. Brame, there's a lot of good things to take out of this tour. I thought they played quite well. They had a very similar showing to the one that they had when they were previously in Western Europe's upper division, and it is a completely new roster from that last one. It is a much different roster, but I thought they did pretty well. They had that really nice stretch in the middle of the tour where they picked up a nice back-to-back set of wins, and other than that, things kind of fell apart. So I'm hoping that because this is a brand new roster and they did have a decent amount of success in the upper division, that they do stick together, they can come together in the lower division and make their way back up to the upper division for the following season. But again, even though they are getting relegated, I thought there were a lot of good things to take away from this tour, and if they had won that matchup against Entity in those tiebreakers, then this would be a completely different story, but I would still be saying a lot of good things from this Brame team, and I have really high expectations for them in the coming few DPC tours when it comes to their success, if they manage to keep their roster together, which has notably been an issue for Brame. Following that, at number 27, dropping down 2 spots from last week, we have Lava. They go 0-1 in the week. They lose 2-1 to Hokori. They put up a pretty good fight. They've definitely had a real turnaround from the last tour, having a bit of a better time. They just got kind of put in the way of Hokori, who I didn't even realize this. Hokori ended their tour on a 5-series winning streak, and Lava was just at the hands of that. So they were unfortunate to be in their way. But again, Lava playing much better this tour than in the last one, which is always encouraging. Following that, at number 26, staying in the same spot from last week, going 1-1 in the week, it's Entity. They lose their last series of the tour to OG. No shame in that. I don't think there was any expectation that they would win that series. If anything, it was good that they didn't get crushed nearly as much as some other teams have at the hands of OG. But it's really their win over Brame that cemented me that, yeah, having them in that spot, number 26, it feels about right. Where they're definitely not one of the upper echelon teams in this division. They've had their struggles, notably the mid game has been their hardest part, where they'll come ahead in the lanes with a strong advantage. They'll start to press that advantage with some team fighting, and it kind of falls apart from there. So I'm very, very excited to see how they do in the coming tour. That win against Brame was a pretty dominant one. We'll see what they're able to do. I am going to be keeping an eye on them for sure. Maybe they make it into the top 4. Maybe they make it to the major, the final major of the year. Who knows? That is a little bit ambitious. But following that, number 25, dropping out of the 3rd row down to the 4th row this week, dropping 1 spot to number 25. It is eHome. And despite the fact that they drop, it wasn't necessarily a bad week at all for eHome. They just get passed by a few teams who I think had better weeks overall. They had a nice 2-0 win over LBZS, but again, looking at where LBZS is on the power rankings and the type of tour that they've been having, it's not the most shocking accomplishment. It was really their 2-1 win over Aster that blew me away, because Aster has been playing, admittedly, they haven't been playing their best Dota, but they are still definitely one of the top half teams in China. So the fact that eHome was able to take this win after having a pretty miserable tour to this point was pretty impressive and pretty encouraging. Again, it doesn't save their tour. They still will not be attending the major, and they weren't exactly all that close either. But regardless, they rounded off the week with a 2-1 loss to VG Gaming, which if they had won, they would have been tied with RNG for that major spot. So unfortunately, they let that one slip away from them, but overall, not a terrible time for eHome. And once again, they find themselves in the middle, not quite getting relegated, but not quite qualifying for the major. Obviously, they finished 4th place in the previous tour. They would have qualified, but it didn't go so well when they actually played those regional finals. Following that, at number 24, kicking off this 3rd row, dropping 2 spots from last week, we have 4 Zoomers, who end off on a strong note, taking down the cut 2-0. But again, as I talked about when I was on the cut, not the most impressive tour from them. And so 4 Zoomers, kind of more just business as usual, showing that they are still a cut above the weaker teams in this division. They're just struggling to really get to that next step. And that's why they kind of find themselves in the middle of this list here. I'm still waiting for them to really break through, and there just hasn't really been that progression that I've been hoping for. Following that, at number 23, we have dropping, I believe, 5 spots from last week. It could be 6. I had to swap 2 teams around on my list here. Dropping 5 spots from last week at least. It's Team Secret. And again, I already kind of touched on them a little bit when I was talking about Enigma Galaxy and how that series has gone. But yeah, it's just not looking like a typical Team Secret puppy stack, especially when you look at the players that are on this team, especially when you saw the role changes that we saw heading into this tour, where Sumail was going back to the carry position, Nisha was going back to mid. It looked really good in that series against Team Liquid, and ever since then, it has looked pretty bad. Sumail has looked really uncomfortable on his carry position, having a lot of really weird deaths that just make you question, what the hell was he doing there? What was he thinking? Nisha's been playing quite well, but the team isn't really coming together. When you think about players like Ice 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 and Puppy and Yaps are on the same team, you think about strong as hell lanes, a huge diverse hero pool, and we're just really not seeing that. These games are going a little bit longer than some of the more stompier games in this region, but it never really feels like Team Secret is in a position where they're going to be able to steal a game off of a team. And they end up losing to Enigma Galaxy this week, which was Enigma Galaxy's only win. And it's a hurdle that Team Secret, even in this position, is still unable to overcome. And so that loss ends up handicapping their chance of making it to the major, or at least forcing tiebreakers for the major. And yeah, I'm waiting for this team to turn it around, and it just has not looked like it's going to be happening anytime soon. And it begs the question, will there be roster changes before the third tour? Will there be roster changes before TI? If they're expecting to make it to TI in the way that they're playing right now, they're not going to make it to the top 20 of the DPC. There's just no way. So we'll see what they do in the third tour. I think the third tour will be what decides Secret's fate for the upcoming few months, if they do manage to make any changes before TI. I wouldn't be surprised if they made any changes as now that Tour 2 is completed, but yeah, we'll see. It has not looked all that great for them. And following that, at number 22, moving up one spot from last week, we have Vici Gaming, who goes 2-0 in the week, a pretty great week. They take down Magma. Not the most impressive win, but it was still a rather dominant win by them. But then it's their win over eHome that, again, it smited eHome's chance of making it to the major and forcing some tiebreakers, thus forcing Vici Gaming into some tiebreakers, which they would later forfeit. It's like, man, you ended off on such a strong note, going 2-0 in your last two series to force tiebreakers for the major, and then you just forfeited it. But again, as I talked about at the start of the video, it could just be that all the Chinese teams are going to withdraw from this major, so it wouldn't matter all that much anyways. The only thing that's really on the line is like 40 extra DPC points for finishing 4th as opposed to 5th. And given the fact that they had also cited Irving having some physical issues, kind of understandable. Still a little strange, but more understandable. Following that, at number 21, dropping one spot from last week, they drop even though they haven't even played. Again, just some teams getting past them. They didn't play any matches they were supposed to play against Simply 2-Based, but again, Simply 2-Based forfeited. It's Wildcard. Still a pretty solid tour overall for Wildcard. I think there's a lot of good things to talk about. And now that they're ahead of 4 Zoomers on the standings, I think it's time that we start talking about their next step. I've been talking about 4 Zoomers not quite being able to crack into the top 3 of North America despite as much as they can try. Wildcard Gaming has been making that progression. We've been able to see how much they've improved throughout these past few months. Will they be able to start taking series off of the Quincy Crews, the Evil Geniuses, the TSMs? I think time will tell. These guys do have the potential, but as we've seen with 4 Zoomers, it's not that easy. Following that, at number 20, moving up 8 spots from last week. This is the team that has been knocking a few of these teams down, even though they've had pretty decent weeks. It's Hokori, and as I mentioned earlier, first off, they end off their last week going 2-0, and they end off on a 5-series winning streak, which would end them up with a 5-2 record. It would end up forcing some tiebreakers with them and Beast Coast that they were unfortunately not able to win. They lose that series in 3. It was a very close series. It would have been a hell of a storyline if they were the ones that knocked out Beast Coast from the major, but alas, they just couldn't quite overcome it. But damn, what an impressive tour for Hokori. After having a bit of a downward, trajectory after the last tour, not performing to the expectations that I think a lot of people had for them, including myself. I had them, I think, pegged at 3rd or 4th place for the first tour. They ended up finishing near the bottom. This is the Hokori that I was expecting to see, and I'm really happy to see them doing this well. And who knows, maybe for the next tour, they will get themselves into that top 2 spot. They have shown that that's not so unrealistic as we may have thought. Following that, at number 19, moving down 4 spots from last week, it's SMG. And they moved down 4 spots. It's pretty drastic, but it is a little bit of a correction. This was not the best tour for SMG. And honestly, I still have them rated up here despite the fact that they have a sub 500 record. They lost more series than they ended up winning. It's a very, very, very difficult division in Southeast Asia. And ultimately, it's their series loss to Enigma Galaxy that ends up costing them that potential tiebreaker. If they had won that series, they would have had tiebreakers up against T1 and Polaris for that one major spot. The chance that they make it in there, still quite slim. You're playing against teams as good as Polaris and T1, but we didn't get to see that at all. And for SMG, after making some roster changes since the last tour, I think they were expecting a little bit more from themselves. I was expecting a little bit more from them. I was hoping that they wouldn't end up being one of the 3 teams, the typical Boom, T1, Fnatic, and SMG. That's 4 really good teams. I was hoping they wouldn't be the odd man out. But in this tour, they definitely were, and they do have some things to work on. I have my concerns with this team, And will there be more roster changes around the corner? Will they make more changes heading into the third tour, heading into TI, if they do make it to TI? There are still qualifiers, which at this point is looking like the most likely path for SMG, given that they haven't been attaining the most amount of DPC points. But I digress. We'll see how it ends up going for them. Following that, at number 18, moving up 2 spots from last week, these guys have been fluctuating pretty much in the same area this whole tour. They end off on a hell of a strong note, though. Not the most impressive, but they end off 2-0 with nice wins over both Beast Coast and APU Kings. Not that first series, I was not expecting that, but it is Infamous, and Infamous has been giving Beast Coast a hard time when it comes to playing in the tour. Of course, it was a different story in the regional finals where Beast Coast came in and swept them 3-0, but regardless, Infamous, they seem to be playing the spoiler role pretty well. They don't manage to make it into that major slot. They don't get relegated either. They're kind of sitting in the middle. This was a little bit of a regression from the previous tour, but there's still a lot of good things to look forward to. This team hasn't completely fallen apart like it almost looked like they were going to in the middle of the tour. And so I'm hoping that they can stay together and come ahead in the top 2 in the following tour. Following that, at number 17, staying in the same spot from last week, it's Polaris. Polaris picks up a nice 2-0 win over OB Neon. Again, not the most impressive, but they're going through the motions. They're showing that even as they are a team coming in from the lower division, they're able to still take down some of these weaker teams in this division pretty reliably. But ultimately, it's the 2-0 loss up against T1 in those tiebreakers that ends up costing them a potential major slot. They were so close. But that series wasn't that close, so it feels like they were close because they forced tiebreakers, but T1 was still showing that they were the more mature team, the more developed team, and T1, they lost their series to Polaris earlier on in the tour. They showed that they learned their lesson from that series, and they came back fiery, and T1 is now going to be heading to the major. And Polaris, again, they don't make it to the major, but a lot of great things to take away from this tour. These guys have been playing fantastic. Seriously, an underrated team. If you do not watch the Southeast Asia region, check out one of their matches. There are a lot of fun players to cheer for on that team. All right, now we are going to be moving up into the top 2 rows, and we're going to be starting to get into some teams heading to the major. In fact, there's only one team in these top 2 rows here that will not be attending the major, which, given that these are power rankings and these are completely opinion-based and I only make minimal changes throughout the entire tour, I'm pretty happy with the fact that, ultimately all of the major teams ended up near the top and all of the weaker teams ended up near the bottom, because it really has been the teams that have been playing the best and being able to win. I'm looking at you, Balrogs, that have been able to keep themselves at the top. There have been a lot of teams that started near the bottom and made their way up. A lot of teams that have been up here the entire time. And just generally happy with this list. So kicking things off with a team that almost drops out of these top 2 rows. It was a rough final week for these guys here. They dropped 10 spots to number 16. It was pretty rough. And I was talking about these guys. They're a Chinese team, very similarly to Extreme. It's not Extreme, that they had a very good tour. There was a lot of promising signs, especially with their performance in the previous tour in the upper division of China, but they hadn't played the best teams in the division yet. They were 4-0 heading into this final week of the DPC, but they hadn't played against Aster, they hadn't played against PSG.LGD, and they hadn't played against Extreme. And that's RNG, who proceeds to lose all 3 of those matches, which shows me that they're not really doing as well as we expected them to. And they did go through some roster changes, I believe, getting rid of God King. I thought God King was really starting to get his game together. The team was starting to come together, but ultimately, I guess the team did not feel the same way, and they ended up getting rid of him. Fortunately for them, Vici forfeits those tiebreakers. I don't know how well they would have done had they actually been forced to play those tiebreakers, but they do come ahead in the top 4. And even if they don't go to the major, they'll come away with 40 extra points because of that. But yeah, not exactly the best ending for this second tour here for RNG. Following that, at number 15, moving up 1 spot from last week, the only team here in this top 2 rows that will not be attending the major, and that is Quincy Crew. You know what? They ended off a lot better than they started. That's for damn sure. And their record is a little bit deceiving. They go 6-1 in the tour. They force a 3-way tie with both Evil Geniuses and TSM by taking a fantastic series over TSM. A very, very close series up against TSM, which was very uncharacteristic for the Quincy Crew throughout the rest of this tour, who has looked like a pretty big mess to this point, making uncharacteristic mistakes against clearly weaker teams that would force these series to go longer and much closer than they should have been. season. But regardless, they were still able to come ahead with wins. They get a win when they need it up against TSM. They force tiebreakers. They don't win the tiebreakers. They lose both of their best of ones up against EG and TSM, but I don't weigh the best of ones as much as I do a best of three. Best of ones are really just a coin toss a lot of the time. Not to take anything away from the winning teams, but a best of one is very, very different from a best of three or a best of five. So Quincy Crew, they end up stronger than they started, but ultimately no major for them, which congrats to TSM. They're going to be making their first ever major. Very exciting for them. But for Quincy Crew, this can be seen as a pretty big disappointment, especially after the tour that they had in Tour 1. We'll see what they do. Following that, at number 14, moving up 7 spots from last week, almost an entire row, we have Extreme. And as I was talking about with RNG, heading into this final week, Extreme was looking extremely good, no pun intended. They were 4-0, but they hadn't played against the beasts of the region yet, which in this final 2 weeks, or in this final week and a half roughly, they did pretty damn well against. They lose 2-0 to Aster heading into this week, but again, Aster being one of the more powerful teams in the region, I didn't think too much about it. But then they proceeded to take down both RNG, and then they would take down Aster again in a tiebreaker matchup, which showed that they were able to learn from their mistakes and come back and win that. So I thought that was impressive. And even though it wasn't the most impressive week for them when it comes to just looking at the raw record, they went 2-2, but showing how competitive that they've been able to be with the top dogs in the region, I can't really rate them any lower than where the other top dogs of the region are. They're clearly on par with them, and it makes sense when you look at their roster. They do have struggles here and there. There are fluke matches where they just lose a series or lose a game that they probably should have won. But yeah, they are still looking quite good, and I'm excited to see if they do end up playing in the major, which is just a couple weeks away. Next up at number 13, staying in the same spot from last week, it's Team Liquid. They only play one series. They lose 2-1 to Gaming Gladiators. I don't end up busting them down for that. Again, Gaming Gladiators have been playing fantastic for the past, 4 months now? 5 months almost? Yeah, they've been playing extremely well. And the fact that Liquid was able to keep this series as close as it was, totally commended to them. So they will be attending the major, and ultimately, again, not a terrible thing. You're losing the Gaming Gladiators, and you're making it look close. Following that, at number 12, moving up 2 spots from last week, these guys had a very, very busy final week, playing 5 series. It's Aster, moving up to number 12. They kicked things off with a 2-0 win over Extreme, as I just talked about. Following that, they lost 2-1 to eHome, which was a little bit alarming. Again, eHome has been struggling with their consistency. This is a series that Aster should have won. It was quite close, but they let it get away from them. Following that, they take down both RNG and PSG.LGD. Yes, they managed to take down the undefeated Goliaths of the region, PSG.LGD, who have not yet lost in a series at all throughout this entire DPC season. Not just this tour, the whole season, including the regional finals. They took a series off of them, but then they would end up losing their series up against Extreme in the tiebreakers. So yeah, overall though, still a fantastic week for them. I bumped them up 2 spots for that, especially with the amount of series that they had to play in such a short amount of time. It is pretty impressive that they were able to come ahead with this record. Following that, at number 11, moving up 1 spot from last week, it is Tundra. And Tundra kind of started off the week not exactly in the best way. They start things off with a 2-1 loss to Gaming Gladiators, and it was a very close series. It really could have gone either way. This series was a showing of the two of the strongest teams, not only in the DPC, not only in the region, but in the DPC as well. But it was the fact that when they lost that series, they were now on a 3-series losing streak. They had gone from being 3-0 to 3-3, which was a little bit alarming for Tundra. They do manage to win their final series of the DPC, which was against Brame. Not the most impressive thing ever, but I still have my concerns with Tundra. I do have them quite high, maybe a little bit higher than a few other people would rate, maybe even a little too high for my liking. I do still have faith in these guys. I'm hoping that they can really get this consistency together. I'm trusting the fact that this roster hasn't been together for too long when you think about the fact that Soxa has only been on the team for, a month and a half now. So we'll see how they end up doing in that major. They do still clinch top 4 in Western Europe. Following that, at number 10, dropping 5 spots from last week, it was a rough finale to this tour, very similar to their first tour as well. It's Beast Coast. They go 0-2 to finish things off. Now, this couple of losses to end off a tour is not as rough as the last tour where they lost 3 in a row. But still, it is a little bit alarming, especially when one of the teams that they lose to is Infamous, a team who has been struggling quite a bit in this tour. They are still not able to beat them in the tour setting. They also lose to Thunder Awaken, which has been a notable issue for Beast Coast as of late. They have been really struggling to beat Thunder Awaken, and it's a good thing that they didn't play them in the regional finals, because I think if Thunder Awaken was actually playing as well as we know they could, and they matched up against Beast Coast in the regional finals, they probably would have won that series. But they choked a little bit. Beast Coast took advantage of that, went all the way to the finals and won it. Beast Coast, they do come ahead with the win against Hokori in the tiebreakers. They will still be attending the major, but this is not the momentum that we were expecting them to be going into the major with. Following that, rounding off this second to last row here, we have at number 9, staying in the same spot from last week, T1. T1, they lose 2-1 to Fnatic. Fnatic has been playing fantastic, quite frankly, so no real shame in that. It is T1, though. They should still be being a little bit more competitive, taking series off of some of these better teams, which they have been struggling with a little bit in this tour. But regardless, they do win the series that matters, which is their 2-0 series win against Polaris in the tiebreakers that secures them that major spot. So we'll see how they do. Their roster has not been looking as good as it was in the last tour, and you know, when you lose a player like 23 Savage, it makes sense. He was a absolutely dynamic, amazing player, and not to take anything away from Gabby. Gabby, I think, is incredibly talented as well, but 23 Savage, having him not in the roster anymore, it's kind of showing a little bit. So we'll see how they do with the major. Best of luck to them there. All right, getting into the top row now, kicking things off with number 8, jumping up 3 spots from last week. They end off just as strongly as they did in the last tour, and that's Thunder Awaken, who go 2-0 to finish off this DPC tour with a 2-0 win over both APU King of Kings and Beast Coast. Every single time it looks like these guys are starting to struggle or teams are starting to figure them out, they seem to just destroy the next team that they end up playing in the DPC, and that's kind of what we saw here. Even though Thunder Awaken, I do still think, has some weaknesses, most notably when it comes to drafting. They've been covering up those holes quite well with some really, really well-executed strategies in-game and really, really strong laning and team fight coordination. So very, very excited to see these guys at the major. I'm hoping that they do quite well. Following that, at number 7, dropping 5 spots from last week. Again, very easy to fall down once you're higher up on the board because you're competing with a lot of other teams that are doing incredibly well. So all it takes is one rough week or one subpar week and you end up falling, and that is the case for TSM FTX. Still, overall, not a terrible week, just not as good as some of the other teams here. They lose their series up against Quincy Crew right after a fantastic win over Evil Geniuses that should have clinched them number 1 in the North American DPC. They even tweeted about it, BMing them, and then they proceeded to lose to Quincy Crew, which, not to take anything away from Quincy Crew, but Quincy Crew has not been playing that well throughout this tour. This is a series that you have to win, and they let it slip away from them. Fortunately for them, they still managed to win one of their matches in those tiebreakers, which was against Quincy Crew. They will still be going to the major. Seeding does not matter at the major anymore, so not terrible for them. But again, they should have been first seed, no questions asked, and instead they finished second place behind EG, the team that they were taunting after they beat them. So kind of embarrassing. Following that, number 6, moving up 2 spots from last week, going 2-0 to finish things off, we have Gaming Gladiators. A little bit of a hiccup in the middle portion of the tour there for Gaming Gladiators, but they bounced right back. I mean, like, they take down Tundra, one of the most impressive looking teams. Again, they had their struggles as well, but still taking them down 2-1 was fantastic. They also take down Liquid as well, who sure has been also having their inconsistencies. They have still looked very, very good on Team Liquid. They just haven't been as clean as they were in the previous tour. So Gaming Gladiators, they're getting back into form, and I'm so stoked that they're going to be attending the major and that they didn't miss out on their opportunity to make it to a major, given the fact that they weren't able to do that in the previous tour. I'm glad that it wasn't a one-off, them making it into the top 4. Following that, at number 2, they end off very strong. Not the most impressive way to end things off, but regardless, what a fantastic tour for OG. They finished things off with a 2-0 win over Entity, and as I talked about when I talked about Entity, it wasn't the most one-sided series. We've definitely seen OG destroy teams much harder than this. I think Entity is just a better team than some of the teams that they dumpstered. like Enigma Galaxy. But regardless, man, OG has just been playing fantastic Dota. And heading into this season, when they put together this roster, this is not a roster I looked at and was instantly blown away by. When I did my Tour 1 predictions, I think I had OG finishing 6th or 7th place. They're the top team in Western Europe right now, and they're playing fantastic. They have everything that you would need from a winning and successful team. They have a coach that seems to have very amazing strategies, great drafting that synergizes very well with the play styles of all the players. I think their play styles also match the meta very well, and it could just be the fact that we've only seen them play on this relative meta, which is why maybe I'm feeling that way. But regardless, they have a star mid laner, BZM, who has been fantastic. They have Yuragi, who has always been there whenever they needed to count on him. Granted, usually BZM and ATF and the rest of the team are able to kind of build up that momentum for Yuragi to come in and win the game, but whenever they haven't been able to, Yuragi will be there. He'll carry the game. And yeah, wow. Fantastic team overall, and I'm super excited to see them at the major. Following that, at number 4, staying in the same spot from last week, they end off strongly as well, going 2-0 with 2-1 wins over Fnatic and SMG. That's boom. They lose their tiebreaker match up against Fnatic. It was a rematch, but again, Fnatic has been playing amazingly, so I don't fault them too much for that. But Boom has one setback throughout the entire tour. It is that loss to Fnatic. Sorry, it wasn't a loss to Fnatic. It was that forfeit that they had to have up against Enigma Galaxy. These guys could have been flawless. Really unfortunate that that happened, but Fnatic does beat them in the tiebreakers. Regardless, wherever they are, they're in the top row. Boom is amazing, and I can't wait to see them play. Following that, at number 3, moving up 7 spots from last week, we have Fnatic. Yeah, Fnatic is playing very well, scarily well. They have been playing pretty freaking amazing Dota, and I'm so stoked to see them play. A nice tiebreaker win over Boom after having a series loss against them in the tour. They take down T1 as well, who, as I was talking about, even though they have been struggling a little bit more than the last tour, they're still an incredibly talented team, and Fnatic has just been cruising through this tour. So I'm very excited for that. And at number 2, there's only 2 teams left. I think you guys know which 2 teams they are. Moving up 1 spot from last week, it's Evil Geniuses. Yeah, they end off the tour quite well. They lose to TSM. They then beat, I believe it was DogChamp, and then they forced tiebreakers because Quincy Crew took down TSM, and then they win both the tiebreakers. And again, I'll talk about it. The tiebreakers aren't the most impressive thing ever. Again, best of 1s are very different from best of 3s. But man, what an amazing tour for EG. They have really had a night and day difference between their previous tour and this one. They have come together so well. And again, everyone's playing fantastic. The whole team has come together. And with them being number 2 and the team that I think we all know is number 1 right now, maybe that's a foreshadowing of our major finalists. And if it does, well, then that's not great news for EG, because at number 1, staying in the same spot from last week, it's PSG.LGD. And for PSG.LGD, I debated in moving them down. They did have that series that they did end up losing. I don't remember who they ended up losing to. Yeah, Aster. But looking at some of the other teams here, EG also lost a series this week. Fnatic lost a series this week as well. So did Boom. A lot of teams near the top didn't have the strongest weeks. And so for PSG.LGD, who has been utterly dominant the entire tour so far, the entire season so far, I'll keep him at number 1 for now. If Team Spirit was still on this list and all the Eastern European boys and Team Spirit was 7-0, I would definitely still have Spirit at number 1. But for now, we have PSG at number 1. So let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. More content to come throughout the coming few weeks, especially as we get closer and closer to the major. I'm still a little bit worried that we haven't heard anything from Valve, but it should be exciting nonetheless. Whether it's good or bad, Valve always knows how to excite everyone and get everyone riled up. So yeah, anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. I'll talk to you guys very soon. And this is the last power rankings for the next few weeks. So hope you guys enjoyed it. All right. Bye, guys.